Sunday Baroque Conversations is made possible by the Friends of Sunday Baroque and is produced at WSHU Public Radio in Fairfield, Connecticut. I'm Suzanne Bona. Thank you for listening. Don't miss an episode of Sunday Baroque Conversations. Subscribe on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a review. If you want to find out where you can listen to our weekly show, visit our website, sundaybaroque.org, for a station list and our 24/7 stream. Again, that's sundaybaroque.org.
I am Alan Turing, and I am writing this book.
I am writing for you.
Matthew Suttor is a composer and educator who teaches at Yale University. And when he started there in 1999, he was in the Department of Music, but he later moved to the School of Drama as a professor in the practice of sound design. And then in 2023, he became program manager at the Center for Collaborative Arts and Media, and he's a senior lecturer in theater and performance studies. The hallmark of his craft is intertwining music technology with acoustic elements, and he's done that to create operas and dance works, theatrical music, chamber compositions, sacred music, sound installations, as well as TV and film scores. And his work includes deriving music from patterns in nature and harnessing the power of AI and collaboration and the prospect of teaching creativity. And we're going to talk about that. I'm so pleased that Matthew Suttor is joining me on Zoom to talk about all this. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Great to be here.
I have so many questions, and I hardly know where to begin. But, you know, your work overlaps in so many concepts. And so I thought I'd ask you something really basic. But that is, if someone asks you, what do you do? How do you answer?
I've been described as a super collaborator.
Okay, I like that.
So all of the forms of music that you listed, they're all collaborations in some sense. Mm-hmm. So I'm working with theater directors. Opera is probably the most collaborative thing you could possibly do because it just brings absolutely everything together in terms of musical and theater arts. Mm-hmm. And then more recently, I've become interested in collaborating with scientists and so looking at collective animal behavior, the way in which trees breathe, for example, and then figuring out how to teach all of that. So that's what I do.
So you are a musician, you're a composer, and your background or your specialty is computer music, but I don't know, maybe you did start in this, but how did you first come to music? How did music sort of become a thing in your life?
Oh, good question. So I was a child composer and was drawn to anytime I walked into a room that had a piano in it, I would gravitate to it and start making up music. Oh. And I begged my parents for we didn't have a piano, and I begged my parents for lessons, and I think they thought that this might be a passing phase. So they said, well, you can get piano lessons if you go practice at a friend's house, which was about a mile away. So I think my mother thought that this was an ingenious way for me to not succeed. But little did she know that I was completely hell-bent on this. And so it was a really natural thing to begin to understand what music was about, but also to compose. So I started really late. Mm-hmm. So I would have been around 11 years old by the time I started getting lessons. So middle school, so intermediate, as we call it in New Zealand. And I gave my first piano recital at the end of that year in front of the school assembly. And I can still play those pieces, actually.
Oh, what were they? What were those pieces?
I wrote this piece in G minor that smells particularly like Beethoven, and I actually wrote a violin concerto in A minor, which sounds very much like Vivaldi, and it was very derivative, but that was also my way of understanding how music worked, and I was
Okay.
really fascinated by the way that it functioned, and that I could feel things out at the keyboard and understand how harmonies progressed from one to the other,
Hmm.
and it was a way of challenging myself as a young pianist, and so that and yeah, so I wrote piano music, and I became really interested in the organ too.
Hmm.
Started violin lessons, and I was really fortunate at high school in the way that many of us are, that the teacher that I had, who was my home class teacher, was also the music teacher, and
Hmm.
she was English, and she had studied at Royal College,
Wow.
and uh, she opened up a whole world to me.
Oh.
And so I learned how to harmonize chorales, and in New Zealand at the time there was quite a rigorous music curriculum that the whole country followed, and so introduced to new music, and electronic music was actually a part of that curriculum, which
Wow.
was interesting.
Yeah.
And focused mostly on the violin by that point. So and viola, playing in orchestras, and then I went to the University of Auckland, which are the Conservatory of Music, and electronic music was an integral part of the curriculum. The composers there had studied in Europe, and they thought this was an important thing. And I'd had no studio experience by that point, because there was not this there just wasn't a possibility.
Mm.
And I remember just walking into the studio and being completely overwhelmed by the technology. Like, how am I going to make all of this work? And it just became my place. And then interestingly, that's when the collaborators started to appear. So my roommates later on in college were theater people, and they said, "Well, hey, you're a composer. You can write music for us." And
Mm.
so that's, yeah, it was a slippery slope from
Mm.
that point
Mm.
on.
Were you also the science and math kid? Were you, you know,
No,
multifaceted?
no, really. I mean, I think I was probably okay at those subjects, but I
Mhm.
was really focused on music. It
Okay.
became clear to me from the beginning that I wanted to be a composer, and also the idea of um, that New Zealand is really quite remote. It's from right around the other side of the planet, and so our worldview is very much kind of looking out, and
Okay.
so I got the idea that you early on, because of my high school music teacher, that you could travel using music. And
Mm.
I wanted to study music overseas. That was my ambition.
Oh.
And by birthright, New Zealanders and Australians can live and work in the UK, and that's what many people did. But I didn't want to do that. I was really interested in what was happening in the United States,
Hmm.
particularly in New York. And there was a really kind of wonderful moment when Steve Reich and musicians toured New Zealand. And I
Mm.
got to meet, they came to the University of Auckland, and some of them performed, and I got to
Oh.
meet them. They said, "You have to come to New York." And
Oh.
that's what I did.
Wow.
Got a Fulbright, and ended up at Columbia.
Wow. I love though, just to back up just a smidge though, like when you talked about your pieces, those early compositions that you
Mm.
played that was sort of Beethoven like and Antonio Vivaldi like, whatever. I mean, that's a time honored tradition, right? That is not only copying out, but writing in the style of, and that is exactly as you said. Like, did you just intuitively know to do that, or did that teacher kind of steer you in that direction, or you were listening to these things, you knew that was Beethoven like and Vivaldi like.
Yeah, I think I no, that happened before. So that was I was quite young, and so it was in my middle school music teacher was the person that realized that I had musical talent,
Hmm.
and discovered that I was writing music or composing it and playing it. and she taught me how to notate. So that was the beginning, and I
Mhm.
remember vividly. I was obsessed with Bach. Everything was about Bach, basically. And then she mentioned that she had a copy of the Preludes and Fugues, and I remember being absolutely stunned and being like, "You can have such a thing? Like that exists?"
Wow.
And I remember her handing me like volume one. It was like, "Wow, this is like like it's like the secrets of the universe in this book." And so I think it came out of trying to understand what I was hearing and what I was seeing on the page, and
Ah,
also the difference between those things. So I
right.
remember, so my parents had this record called, I think it was called Masterpiece Bach, and it had the prelude from the E major partita, which I was struggling to play as a young violinist, and the Brandenburg Concerto Number Three.
Mhm.
And I was completely obsessed with this music. And I remember going to the library and getting the score out to the Brandenburg Concerto, and then being stunned by looking at it, and then realizing that what I was looking at the page was not the music. Yes, I could read it and sort of understand, well, this is this part, these are the viola parts, etc. These are the
Right.
multiple string parts. But then if I ever had a good thought as a kid, it's like, oh, music is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I think was the thing that drove me to figure out how to make music that sounded like what I was looking at, because you can look at it on the page, but it's not going to be the same thing until you figure out how to kind of realize it
Hmm.
in sound.
Hmm.
And so I began to mimic the kinds of progressions that you hear in Vivaldi, for example, and just and being fascinated that my ears were allowing me to go through a harmonic progression and figure out, well, how, like, where's it going to end, and not being completely sure, but your fingers and your ears end up kind of telling you.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's it's a combination of a bunch of things, but just being fascinated by the mechanism and the greater effect of music.
Right. I can't, you are reading my mind or somehow, infiltrating my computer or whatever, because literally the next thing on my list was I wanted to talk about the thing you just said, which is music is greater than the sum of its parts. Um, when I had the good fortune to attend that performance last week of
Hmm.
the opera, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But you said two things, and I thought they were really interesting because they're related, and in a way they almost sound like they're contradictory, but they're not. And I think that they're complicated, they're complex.
Hmm.
And what I wanted to ask you is, what is music? Because we do
Hmm.
say, and you said, music is math, right?
Hmm.
But music is more than math, and music is more than sound. And
Hmm.
and as you just said, music is greater than the sum of its parts. So how would you answer that? How what do you ponder when you think about what makes something music versus just notes on the page?
Hmm. Well, music is the experience of it by definition is in time.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look at something on the page and understand or try to understand how it functions.
Mm-hmm.
And but the experience of that can only truly be absorbed and embodied until you hear it played out in time. So yes, music has many functions that are mathematical, the harmonic series and the way
Mm-hmm.
that temperaments work, and
Mm-hmm.
the way in which lines fit together and counterpoint. Uh, but it's not until we listen to it, and that's when the emotions kick in, and then we begin to layer whatever it is that we layer on top of it, and that can be very different for people. And some people it's visual, some people it's an emotional thing. Others have all kinds of responses. And having taught at Yale for so many years, I know that people experience music in many, many different ways.
Hmm.
But there is this, emotional connection to whatever it is that they through whatever they experience, however they experience it, whether it's a form of synesthesia, which is more common than you might think, and there are many different forms of that, storytelling of all sorts. And some people imagine scenes and it's visual, and for others it's almost a kind of a literary experience that's somewhat intellectual and uh, and somewhat f formal. That they appreciate the way that things unfold in a form in form.
Hmm. Hmm. So, slightly veering off a little bit here, one pretty important pillar of your research is addressing the question: Can you teach creativity? And it's kind of related to that. So that's not really a yes or no question. I kind of assume that by asking the question, the answer is yes. And so my real question, I guess, is how? What does that mean to you, too? Because, you can create something, one can create something and not necessarily be particularly creative. It's kind of like what makes something music versus just a collection of notes on a page.
Yeah.
So what is creativity and how does one teach it?
Well, the story or to that class that I teach at Yale, it started when I was at the David Geffen School of Drama, and I taught the designers and directors workshop, which was a compulsory class for second year stage directors, first year projection designers, first year playwrights, and second year sound designers. And it was a chance for designers and directors to have a conversation around the nature of projection design and sound design with playwrights. And often this was the first time that playwrights had heard their ideas realized in sound, and also realized through images. And we contributed to the production of their first year plays.
Ah.
So it was about a conversation between theater practitioners that was really specific to uh, um, the ephemeral arts of projection design and sound design that both exist in time,
Mhm.
and in some ways actually quite similar ways. And there's an interesting way that teaching those students was quite similar.
Hmm.
And then we lost the playwrights through this scheduling thing, and I was panicked. It's like, oh, how am I going to teach this class without the playwrights plays? And then the students came to me and said, no, no, this is a good thing. We don't want the playwrights in the class. And I was shocked. It's like, oh, why is that? They said, well, we want the chance to be able to design together, and they use this phrase of design-led creation,
Hmm.
and they wanted to be able to make things together that wasn't tied to the playwright's words or even involve actors.
Hmm.
So essentially, what they're talking about, in some sense, is installation.
Mhm.
And so the class became an exploration of how they could make work together, and they made things that went into the Yale Art Gallery, and it was called Gallery Plus Drama, and we did it for 15 years, and it was a free for all where they got to put installations in the gallery, and it was wonderful. And over time, it became naturally an investigation of creative process
Hmm.
and looking at the theories that people had around creativity, what it meant to create. And one of the first pieces of writing that I discovered was a short letter by Einstein to a colleague in response to a colleague who had asked how he thought about mathematics. And to paraphrase what he said is, before you commit your ideas to language and to symbols comes combinatory play.
Hmm.
And this is the state where you're thinking but non-thinking, and you're seeing the associations and the connections between things.
Mhm.
He didn't invent the speed of light or energy or mass. He saw the connections between these things.
Oh.
So it was a thought experiment.
Mhm.
And that's a kind of remarkable thing. So how can we unpack that? How can we turn that into essentially a creative exercise? And that's something I've been teaching for many years. And as it was started as a graduate school class in drama. Now it's an undergraduate class for anybody who wants to take it. I've run workshops at the executive education program at the School of Management, many labs at the School of Medicine, and then outside groups as well. So it's a way of being able to introduce what a creative process is, what creative thinking is, in the sense of debunking that ideas need to be good,
Mhm.
and essentially how you can work with arbitrary ideas or thinking inside the box. And there's so much terminology that is, for want of a better description, corporate driven. So we
Mhm.
think outside the box, or just do it, or what, or the words that meant one thing that now mean something completely different. We've forgotten the original meaning of brainstorming,
Mhm.
right? Which now is very much about judgment, but actually the original idea really is completely dependent on not judging ideas and just producing a volume of thoughts and then editing down. Even things like serendipity, which originally meant seeing the opportunity, now means like happenstance. So we've confused ourselves.
Mhm.
So having taught composition for 20 years in drama, how do I get the person that's sitting next to me with the skills that they have to Broadway in 3 years?
Mm.
Which is essentially what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we're very often successful. And
Yeah.
so, how do you get that? How do you create the circumstances for that quantum leap to be able to take off?
Mhm.
And so, I've developed all kinds of exercises and ways of looking at things
Hmm.
that, in some sense, create distance from what it is that you're doing, so you're able to see it, and not your self-worth is not completely taken up by it. So it becomes impossible to create. But that distance creates perspective, generates curiosity, which is the gateway to creativity.
Hmm.
And what I realized is that it doesn't really have much to do with music, or it can and has had, but is applicable to, it could be a room full of venture capitalists from China, or a lab that might be struggling, for example, in their
Mm.
research.
Mm. Mm.
So it was a process that led me to some of these thoughts that seem to be helpful to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting that you say that because I was also thinking about talking to you about the idea of, like creative block, writer's block, artist block,
Mm.
whatever, because that is it's very common. I write a lot and sometimes I sit there and I just think, oh my God, and then sometimes, as they say, the muse visits, right? So it's a very present question, when you are someone who is in some productive kind of field like that. I'm curious to know about, does AI get writer's block? Creative block?
Uh, well, I've seen all kinds of strange things uh, because of this opera project,
Uh-huh.
and maybe this is an opportunity for us to talk about how that came about.
Yeah.
So I wanted to compose a an opera about Alan Turing.
Mhm.
And I had been thinking about what the next opera project was, and I thought maybe it would be more like a monodrama for a solo singer or something like that.
Mhm.
And I wrote to one of my collaborators, in Ireland who was a former student to say, well, what about Alan Turing? And actually, I'd just given a talk to the Department of Genetics at Yale about creativity. They were on retreat, and they invited me to just give a talk, which I did. And then one of their research scientists came to me afterwards, and I think I might have mentioned the Turing. She said, "Look, I'm really fascinated by Turing. I'm interested in the project that you're about to investigate." And so there was Smita Krishnaswamy, who was on the panel at the Envisioning AI symposium that you saw the performance of the pieces from Turing, and she introduced us to OpenAI. And at that point, they were not a household name. This is right before the beginning of the pandemic, and so we were able to meet with a number of them on these big Zoom calls. I had a group of collaborators that, former students and current students, and there wasn't a lot of theater making going on at that point. And they were interested in talking to us because at that time people were using GPT for creative projects, but they would hear about it after the fact. So to talk to a group of creative people as they began the process was interesting to them. And they advised us on the training of an instance of GPT, which we housed on a server at Yale, and then we fine-tuned it on Turing's papers, and we'd also all of us had absorbed Andrew Hodges' magisterial biography of Turing, which is the basis for the film about him,
Right.
and Benedict Cumberbatch starred in. And so from that book, we knew that he loved George Bernard Shaw, so we included those plays and books that we knew that he'd read about science as a child, and then proceeded to ask this entity, if you like, the same questions that he was asking. Can machines think? Can computers think? And at that point, this is GPT-2, and which was quite capable of really interesting responses, but then would also give uncanny valley kind of nutso responses, and then sometimes would just hallucinate and repeat endlessly, and then there'll be some kind of variation, and that would sound like Gertrude Stein, and so all kinds of really kind of extraordinary responses that were essentially poetic. So the value of it was, as material, was extraordinary, and in some sense because of its imperfections, and this is relatively early technology, and then as we progressed to GPT-3, then the material became much clearer, much more like novel ready stuff, and then now it's not so useful creatively. It's useful for other things.
Okay.
So we know we've been through the history of GPT.
Yeah. And there's so many sort of like overlaps too, because it's Turing, and because of his knowledge of and concern for and fascination with AI. But I'm also curious to know, partly because of what you said about creativity as well, and partly because there is this overlap, there is this this connection to Turing himself. Did you leave any of the garbage stuff in? Like, I say garbage, but some of the nonsense stuff, some of the crazy stuff that you said. Was that your part of the collaboration of making that go away?
Well, some of the crazy stuff was really useful,
Yeah.
and some of it there were phrases that were just extraordinary, that are so beautifully to our eyes and ears poetic. So there are some things that were just utter nonsense in terms of fact, but were useful.
How maybe you've already answered this, but I'm going to sort of double back here, because how did you actually start crafting what became the opera I Am Alan Turing? Like, how did you discern which of those pieces to keep in, and what's the balance of the collaboration in terms of, are you 50-50 collaborators or?
Yeah, right. Well, there were about 10 or so students,
Hmm.
former students, so
Right.
plus me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a reasonably large group, and we would meet once, sometimes twice a week, and we did that for pretty much 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and through 2020, and would go through, in some sense, taking the kinds of things because they'd all done my class, the creativity class. They're all well versed in the kinds of things that we might do. So there were a number of word games. It was perfect for that, where essentially because you need to give it a prompt to get a response.
Right.
So that's I think one of the secrets to any kind of creative endeavor is to turn whatever it is that you're doing into something that's generative.
Mm-hmm.
So that the material, whatever it is you're working with, is it producing material that prompts you to go on with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that by definition it is creative. And so that the algorithm is very much that. You ask it a question or pose something and you get a response, then you have to think of something else.
Mm-hmm.
And that iterative process was very similar to what I wrote my dissertation about, which was in the days of computer music when I was a student at Columbia. So this is mid 90s. I finished in 99. And we were using high-end computers using Unix and which is the operating system and scripting. And so it was algorithmic composition. So you would listen to the results and then make adjustments and then listen to the results and then that feedback loop, which
Mm-hmm.
I called playing the interface
Yeah.
was really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And by definition, generative and hence creative in a sense. And I found that really a wonderful thing. And then I noticed, of course, with this newer technology, so 20 plus years later, that we were doing the same thing. We were at the command line thinking, okay, well, we've got to write something in here, and you do it, and then you get a result, and then you have to think of something else. And when you're in a collaborative group, it's like you're in a devising session. It's like at the writers' table.
Mm-hmm.
The LLM became not well. It in some sense it is the center of attention, but in some ways it's really just somebody else at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Because other what we would do is would generate material. Think, oh, this would be a great scene in the opera, and then we might sort of grab a couple of sentences, and then we'd divide out into groups, and then write. And then some people in the group who were not writers discovered that they were really pretty wonderful. So
Mm-hmm.
some of the arias and the scenes were written by a projection designer or a sound designer. And we had a number of dramaturgs who, by training, are scholars of the theater who were also involved. So it was a
Mm-hmm.
really it was a wonderful group, and in some ways we felt like we were having a séance with Turing, and we had that sort of the kind of hair-raising moment where it said, I'm Alan Turing, I'm writing this for you. I'm here to tell you you're not alone in the world. And we were like, oh God.
Right.
Or I don't believe in God, but you should, and then proceed to tell us why. So we had
Wow.
those moments for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? Alan Turing sadly has been gone a very long time, lived a very short life.
Mm.
But what do you think? What do you think he would make of this, of your work, as well as just the state of AI in our present world?
Well, he foresaw the situation that we're in now and wrote about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was that moment that I described when I was with Hugh Farrell, the producer and dramaturg, when we went to King's College, Cambridge, and to the archive, which, by the way, you will, of all people, will understand this, looks directly at King's College chapel. And that's all you. So it's like the epicenter of British
Yeah.
oral music is like literally out the window. And he'd written in the margins of a paper pretty much describing where we are now, and that people would be anxious about the advent of what we call general artificial intelligence. That there would that the role of humanity is going to be about trying to understand what the machines are trying to say, which is that was the penciled in quote, which somewhat sounds alarming, but also, if you think about it, actually confirms our humanity.
Hmm.
And that, I think, is what he was ultimately writing about and believed in, and got caught up
Hmm.
in tragic circumstances.
Yeah.
Mm.
What does Matthew Suttor think about the circumstances and AI in our present world?
Mm. So say that again.
What do you think about AI in our world today? What's your feeling? Just your gut, your opinion.
I think ultimately this is a life-changing moment for us all. There are reasons to be concerned, but I'm not alarmed, and I can see the potential for AI to have tremendous benefit and be helpful to humanity. And there are some things that it can do, even now, that are going to be that are really helpful. And to the capability of these models is through, particularly through data mapping,
Hmm.
is that's a really powerful thing, that we're not, human beings just don't function that way. And we can't take this set of data and then map it to that. I mean, yes, we could. And it's interesting to point out that the original um, meaning of the word computer was a
Mm.
human being. It was not a machine. So
Mm.
somewhat, so the computer was someone who did that kind of tallying.
Hmm.
Hence the wrens at Bletchley Park, young women who were identified nationally for having an aptitude for
Mm.
puzzle solving and crossword solving, or good with numbers. They were discovered. There was a effort to locate and find them, and they were brought there, and they were computers. The class nature AI and performance and the grant has been about taking first pre-existing data sets of animal behavior, like flocking of birds, or gas fluxes, like exchange of gas and gases in forests, etc. And but now we're starting to gather our own data,
Mm.
and the hope is that that students will be able to do that as well. So uh, kids in schools, but also university students. And so we've been on the roof of my building, which was a former bakery and has a huge chimney, and there's a swarm, this is the right term, a swarm of chimney swifts that comes in every year. They migrate through the area, and they roost in the chimney. So we've been filming that, and
Wow.
it happens over a 2 week period. It's just finishing now. And at its height, it's around 2 to 3,000 birds, and they form this vortex of a hurricane of chimney swifts, and it is really something to behold. So we've been filming it. Rick Prum, who's a professor of evolutionary biology and ecology here at Yale, has helped me, and two of his PhD students have been up there on the roof with me for the last 2 weeks filming them. So we have the data now, and now we're trying to figure out, well, how do you take something that big and turn it into music? So the software that we've been looking at here, and hopefully it's gonna work. So we developed this to work with school kids.
Oh,
And so the language, Discover the Music of Nature, is very much about how we could communicate the idea of data science to kids. And these are real data sets. So they're the pigeons from Oxford and jackdaws also in the UK, fireflies that have been collected here in New Haven, and cliff swallows, etc. And then you click on it, and then you can decide what kind of mood they're in, the style of it, the harmonic relationships, their
wow.
tempo, for example, fast notes, and then there are the mapping questions, like, well, how do you take those coordinates, if you like, and then map that to musical parameters? And that's not a trivial question.
Right.
And so there are a lot of thinking, and like, are they flying around something that looks akin to the face of a clock, where each angle is a different pitch, or are they flying up and down the harmonic series, or through a tonets, which is actually a 19th century way of thinking of some kind of musical pitch space, where you have a
Huh.
lattice of interconnected triads, and then it will this is actually running in real time, and it will generate. Can you hear that?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So it, that's starting to sound like music to
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there were jackdaws in the UK flying around. They've been filmed, and the using multiple 360-degree cameras, you're able to recreate their positions in space.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've taken that data set and have them fly through. In this case, it was a tonets,
Mm-hmm.
and so you hear the harmonies as they begin to shift around. And I just mapped that to a solo violin,
Right.
so sampled sound. Interestingly, it sort of sounds a little Baroque.
I was just going to say it sounds like Bach. It sounds like the beginning of a Bach fugue or something, you know?
It has that um, it has that Baroque quality, which I
Hmm.
love, and that's an important part of my approach to music. And
Hmm.
I mean, I think going back to I was talking about the record, the LP that my parents had, the um, Masterpiece Bach, and so they had this the prelude to the E major solo partita, which is something every violinist wants to play. But they also had Switched On Bach,
Oh,
which has the cantata version of that. So as a kid, I understood that you can have the same piece of music. One is in E major, one is in D major. I'm not saying D, but they could exist in multiple forms,
right.
and that really inspired me, I think.
Hmm.
So that's and this is the behind me. This is the same, not the very synthesizer, but they reissued the synthesizer that this is the Model 10,
Yeah.
that Wendy Carlos used to create that album. So yeah, I mean it's
Wow.
cost me an arm and a leg.
But it was worth it.
So now using these, I've begun to, okay, well here's this way of looking at the world or hearing the world for and setting that up for students, so Yale students and public schools students in New Haven. But as a composer, now I'm beginning to think, well, I really am wanting to figure out how to write music this way.
Yeah.
And so it has some kind of technological aspect to it, but it still has to speak,
Right.
right? It still has to, you still have to figure out how to make it translate for people,
Right.
and also feel good about it as
Right.
a composer and artist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
So we just got some amazing news. We got another Planetary Solutions grant.
nice.
And this time we get to collaborate with Harvard Forest.
Hmm.
So Harvard Forest has the most instrumented forest in the area, so that many people at Yale actually their research is conducted there, so you can get real-time data from that environment. And we're looking to create installations, a sound installation that people can visit. Maybe it runs on your phone, and you can listen to it and walk your way through the forest. And yeah, so we're excited about that.
So cool. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was like, wow, another grant.
Well, this has
Okay.
been amazing. We almost took up an hour of your time, so thank you for being so generous with your time and
Oh,
wisdom
of
and
course.
interesting stories. It was really great. We won't.
I suppose I am a huge fan of Sunday Baroque. So
Thank you. That's very
yeah,
sweet. I'm just blown away that we managed to connect like that, and
amazing.
yeah, I appreciate your willingness to chat with me. And it's interesting because you sort of jokingly said like, well, this is not Baroque or whatever, but I think that people who love creativity and music and arts and culture or whatever are interested in all kinds of things, and it's not genre specific like that. So I think this is going to be really fascinating for anyone.
Well, I think there's something inherently Baroque about the way that I think of music. I mean, that
Yeah.
was my uh, fascination as a child, which is not an uncommon story. This is the entry
Right.
point for many kids, I think. And what I've stuck with though is the importance of harmony, but the horizontal line and the
Mm-hmm.
multiple horizontal lines, the driving rhythms. And
Mm-hmm.
also the kind of the spun out nature of it, the sort of generative unfolding,
Mm-hmm.
which I find incredibly moving. That
Mm-hmm.
that has never left me.
Well, I thank you very much for this conversation. I've been speaking on Zoom with the innovator, composer, and educator Matthew Suttor. Thank you so much. This really has been fascinating.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
She